Good evening. This is the Plymouth Charter Commission meeting from the Great Hall in Plymouth. We will start the meeting tonight by a salute, the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we have 5 members of the commission here in person, and I think there's at least 2 on Zoom. Wrestling and Betsy. So tonight, we have actually three items on the agenda. One is going to be the budget, which we will take up a little further on in our meeting. First in our agenda is going to be a discussion of the provisions in the new charter to kind of go through it once and for all. Perhaps we can actually do a deep dive tonight into this is kind of like advanced charter 601 or something. We've been through it a lot, but tonight I want to go into a couple of the legal issues that have been risen and have been taken care of, and we're ready to go. And then we have our public comment scheduled for 8:30. So to kick off tonight, I made a list of the objectives that we had when we started to work on the new charter for Plymouth. And I'm just going to mention each one, and we can kind of perhaps make specific reference to provisions in the charter that deal with those particular subjects, explain how they work, take up a couple of legal issues which were raised but resolved, and town council, or our special counsel actually helped, and so there are no other remaining legal issues. The charter now remains ready to go, completely legal, and hopefully now everybody is somewhat familiar with it, and we hope in 2 or 3 weeks you'll be completely familiar with it, and the voters will be ready to vote on the 20th. So for the first time ever, this new charter gives the people of Plymouth several objectives, and these were goals when we drafted the charter. First, we tried to make our government more transparent and more open. So I'd like first to take up the, take up the issue of better informed, because we come to that first in the charter. A large part of the first part of the charter talks about information, how it flows back and forth between the Finance Committee and the town meeting. And I would say that when you look at the new charter, we've made significant strides ahead to be sure that town meeting members end up better informed and more informed than they are under the current charter. And the new charter is basically an upgrade of the current charter. I can say that because I was involved in the drafting of the old charter, the one that's currently in effect. It went into effect in 1999, and it was the last time a charter commission was successful on the ballot in getting a charter approved. But I think now we've improved it with this charter that we're talking about tonight. When we say better informed, let's look and see why they are better informed. We've made several changes to the Advisory and Finance Committee. The Advisory and Finance Committee would become known as the Finance Committee because it would be limited going forward to reviewing just finance-related articles. That would be their expertise. We looked at this previously, maybe 10 years ago, but now we've decided to actually go that route. We looked at other towns that do it very successfully, and one specific town that we studied was Arlington, that has been doing this for decades with a finance committee that's specialists in finance, and they deal with all the finance-related articles. So we have a more informed and more, should we say, more attuned to finance issues, and they will deal with the finance articles. We've also lifted a bit of the burden off of the Finance Committee, and the Committee of Precinct Chairs will deal with other non-financial articles. I don't, if any of us else want to speak here, be sure to jump in and add comments or observations. We've made the appointment process to the Finance Committee actually more diverse than it has been ever, by having it appointed jointly now by the moderator and the Committee of Precinct Chairs. We thought that would give us a diversity of appointments. There was always we always heard a lot of criticisms that one person was solely responsible for appointing this entire committee. Well, that's now been divided up, with the Committee of Precinct Chairs appointing 10 members of a 15-member committee, and the moderator appointing the other 5 members. So the appointment process has been, should we say, diversified or liberalized. It's a broader process now with more people involved. Also, for the first time, town meeting members are allowed to serve on the Finance Committee. That doesn't mean it's going to be swarming with town meeting members. No, far from it. As I see it, it's up, of course, to the appointing authorities. It'll just be a few town meeting members from time to time that want to, it's heavy duty, but if they want to serve on the Finance Committee, they would be considered for appointment. But I would certainly think going forward, of those 15 members, the great bulk of them will certainly not be town meeting members. The idea was to give a little seating of the Finance Committee with town meeting and vice versa. That'd be a good process to better exchange of information as to what each is doing. So the Finance Committee itself is a broader functioning body. Some now are calling the Finance Committee a town meeting committee. It's not a town meeting committee. Town meeting members will be probably represented, as I say, by only a few members. It's still basically a committee of financial specialists or people who have some involvement with finances, with a few town meeting members there as well. The moderator under the new charter would no longer be elected town-wide. He would be elected by the town meeting. Again, we felt that this was a strengthening of town meeting. It follows the legislative standard, both state and federal, where the legislative body basically elects its own leader, be it a speaker at the national and state level, or here in Plymouth, our moderator. I think it establishes a better tie between the moderator and basically his function, which is to run town meeting and make sure it is successfully conducted. So that is another major change in the way we have been doing business. His duties don't really involve anything town-wide. It involves the conduct of town meeting to be sure that it's carrying out the will of the voters. So we made several changes there in between with respect to the Finance Committee and the moderator, which we think will improve the flow of information to the town meeting. The procedures stay the same in terms of when the books have to be in town meeting members' hands. That was a major revision in the last charter, which stays in there. It requires the town meeting members to have the books at least so many weeks ahead of time. And if an article, if the book isn't submitted, then it gets postponed until it is submitted, so the town meeting members already have the information before they get to town meeting. So that's why I would say that town meeting will be more informed and better informed than it is under our current charter. The next objective, which we set out to meet, was to introduce more transparency in our government and to make it open. And this is tricky because under the state open meeting law, town meeting members, or town meeting, anything to do with town meeting is basically exempt at the state level. And we knew this as we went into the charter review process. So we decided we would extend the open meeting law further in Plymouth than it has been by saying, notwithstanding the state exemption of town meeting, we would make town meeting caucuses subject to the open meeting law, because that's a key way our town meeting members function is in their caucuses. So there's a provision in the charter that says that town meeting caucuses are subject to the open meeting law. And they have to be posted and all of those kind of requirements. We said at the time that we did this that we would look to see what the new Attorney General was going to say as to committees such as the Committee of Precinct Chairs. The Finance Committee is already subject to the open meeting law because it's not a town meeting body, and putting a couple of town meeting members on that committee doesn't make it a town meeting committee. So the Finance Committee is already covered by the open meeting law. The COPC, we're going to check to see whether the new Attorney General continues the practice of the previous Attorney General. And the reason it's tricky is because the Attorney General's feeling about the open meeting law seems to change from Attorney General to Attorney General. Those of us that served during Martha Coakley's reign as Attorney General, it was much stricter. And Maura Healey, as Attorney General, had made it very clear that town meeting was exempt. So what Ms. Campbell does as Attorney General remains to be seen. We're going to be waiting until she forms a policy with respect to open meeting law. But as far as it goes now in Plymouth, we've extended the open meeting law further than it was under the current charter by applying it to our caucuses, which is a big part of the town meeting business. Yep.
Comment positively about that change. It's one thing I noted that there was a real variability precinct by precinct with the procedures that were followed, especially in regards to the participation of residents of each precinct. If you don't have open meeting law, you don't necessarily permit commentary or discussion. And I think for residents, not town meeting members, not elected officials, it's often the one place and time they interface with government with specific questions on the warrant articles that are coming before each town meeting. So I had seen that, and so I really felt that this was a real positive change to not only do we make changes in balancing the overall government between our legislature, our town meeting, and our executive branches and such, but there's also necessity, or at least it's important to think of the balance between the average resident who doesn't participate necessarily on a regular basis and their immediate representatives, town meetings. So I really felt that was a positive change.
Yeah, actually, Frank, when a few years ago, there was an issue, I remember, that some of the precincts were not open to the public. Yeah, I remember I had experience with a warrant article that I was shepherding through town meeting, and we weren't allowed to speak at a particular caucus. But I think that's all been straightened out now. And so I think our government is functioning in a more transparent and open manner. So is any further comment on transparency? Another objective of our charter was to have a more, or at least make available, a third town meeting so that business could be conducted, if necessary, outside and beyond just the regular two town meetings which we normally have. We have one in the spring and one in the fall. And now under the new charter, we would have the option, it's just strictly an option, as to whether or not to have a third town meeting. If there was business to warrant it, it would be in January. And we're not trying to pile on excessive work or new work or anything to the town departments. It's only to have a town meeting that's there if necessary. And the way it would work is that it would be a optional date that within a few weeks of, is it 4 weeks or whatever it is, of before that before that third town meeting, the select board and the COPC could decide not to have it. They would say, we're just going to waive it, we don't need it, and we go on from there. So it's an optional meeting, but it does get business done if necessary. We understand that if there's delays, and delays cost money, and there are tax savings in getting business decisions made on a timely basis. So that was the idea of adding this third optional town meeting in the charter. Any comment?
I'd also like to comment on that, this was something that in the lead-up to the formation of the Charter Commission was one of the common refrains of critics of our present charter and our present form of government, that it wasn't flexible, it didn't have the ability to do these things. So in a large part, I believe, this was in response to the public's concern for that lack of flexibility. I think that's gotten lost in the mix here, that where that really came from was not this Charter Commission so much as criticisms weighed in on the overall form of government and its flexibility, and we responded to that.
Right. I think another objective which we have addressed in the charter is to make it more democratic and more representative. And one key way of doing that was the fact that the whole town now will have select board representation. There'll be a greater representation of our neighborhoods by adding 3 approved or 3 district elected select board members. So it'll become a 7-member board of selectmen, and 4 of them will be at large and 3 of them will be elected on a district basis. That obviously increases democracy. It makes the individuals, the voters in particular areas of town, will have their own, there'll be a select board person in their neighborhood. And we think that a town the size of Plymouth deserves that added representation because of the enormity of geographically and as well as the diversity of our population. I'd like to ask Bill Cohan to speak on this one.
I think that Bill Cohan, during our deliberations over a period of time, we came to this conclusion that it really started around the idea that voter turnout across the town during a town election was substantially low. And it was happening each year. It was a problem that we're seeing in a lot of communities, not just Plymouth. And there was talk about how we could increase voter turnout. And I think that a town of Plymouth size, one of the biggest in Massachusetts, the fastest growing, we're now closing in on 70,000 people, that the residents should be given, these neighborhoods should be given greater participation in the process. There are parts of Plymouth that are almost 20 miles from downtown Plymouth. And these parts of Plymouth, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, was a forest. Now there's tens of thousands of people living in far corners of Plymouth, and they need a level of representation. Some of the farthest outreaching precincts are some of the poorest performing precincts in voter turnout. So the thought was, how do we get those precincts more engaged in the process? How do we give them an opportunity to participate in the town process from their vantage point, which is at a great distance? And the thought was giving neighborhood representation. And that was the motivation behind looking at expanding the number of people on the Board of Selectmen and giving these neighborhoods specific representation. Because the issues in southern Plymouth at Head of the Bay Road are dramatically different from the issues at Boundary Lane in North Plymouth. And that if we have people that are focused on these issues, this will be not only giving the neighborhood greater representation at a larger table as the town deliberates on issues, but by osmosis, these other board members will be educating fellow board members on what issues might be a priority in one part of Plymouth compared to another Plymouth. So I see it as educating the Board of Select to work tighter together, work more efficiently together on these larger issues across the town, giving neighborhoods more representation, and potentially changing voter turnout on Election Day. So Plymouth has got to a point where it has to start to think about how it can meet the challenges of 70,000 people living in this community, and the idea of giving them greater representation across the board for the reasons that we deliberated on for quite some time. It was a 2-year discussion where we touched on voter turnout, representation, and we came to this conclusion. So again, this as an option for the residents gives them a greater participation in their government.
All right, thank you, Bill. The two legal issues arose with respect to the select board. It's a brand-new concept, so obviously there are going to be legal questions that have to be answered to be sure it's going to work, to be sure it jibes with other state statutes. And I've sent you the two questions and how they got answered. One of them was challenging the districts and somehow violating the state statute about the size of precincts. There's a state statute that says no precinct can have more than 4,000 voters. A select board member who's in one of these districts, the district is made up of 6 precincts. We just divided the 18 precincts in the town by 3. You have 3 select board district members, so each one represents 6 of the 18, but they're still based on precincts, so we're not changing the precincts at all. Each precinct still has the 4,000 voters, and our council found that there was no inconsistency whatsoever with the statute. He didn't even understand the argument that there could be an inconsistency. And the charter says that at the time that the precincts get redrawn every 10 years, the districts themselves will also be redrawn to be consistent with the new precincts. So it's a nice, well-contained process. It will be done together at the same time. The initial districts will be formulated by the select board, actually a special committee appointed by the select board for the next, after 90 days after the charter takes effect. The charter will take effect on July 1st. Then there's a 90-day period for those select board districts to be drawn with a map that everybody agrees with. And then next spring of 2024, those district select board members will be elected for the first time, all 3 of them in the 3 districts, based on the districts as they get set up this summer and fall. So that was one legal question. The other one, actually, that I heard today, and we got a quick answer on it, was that is there any problem in cutting a select board's member term short? Well, we actually got 2 solutions there, and it's going to be up to the select board. There are 2 ways to handle that, where a select board member's term isn't necessarily going to be cut short. But again, this is going to be the ballot for the select board to control. They're in control of the ballot. It can be done legally with respect to Massachusetts state law, and there's a couple of different ways of handling it. But the idea is to end up with at-large selectmen with overlapping terms like we do now, 4 of them, of 1, 2, and 3 years, so they overlap, and then have district select board members with 3-year terms. But it's all a matter of just who appears on the ballot at which particular year, and the select board could draw that up. There are 2 different ways of doing it. I'm convinced that either one would work and would be perfectly legal. The next item on our goal list was to take another attempt to control and zero in on sprawl and the costly development that we're faced with in Plymouth for lack of planning. And it definitely
Mr.
degrades
Chairman?
our quality of life.
Mr. Chairman? Mr.
Yes.
Chairman? Oh, sorry, Mr. Chairman. Can I just go back to this discussion that
Yeah,
we're
go
having
ahead.
about
Sure.
the voting processes? I think there's additional information within the charter that we discussed at length, taking the inspiration from the current Board of Selectmen and their foresight in creating a working group around the 2020 census. Town of Plymouth, during the middle of the pandemic, we were struggling with the results of the census and what this was going to mean in terms of precincts and redistricting. At the time, it looked as if the town was just going to move forward on a certain number of precincts. A number of residents brought their concerns to the Board of Selectmen, concerned about whether or not neighborhoods were being protected in terms of giving them the most representation as they possibly could receive. People were worried about how the redistricting might affect an issue in a neighborhood. They went to the Select Board. The Select Board had the foresight to put together a working group to work with the clerk's office to come up with precincts. That was a success, and I think everybody involved in the process recognized that we ended up with 18 precincts, neighborhoods, issues, discussed on a level that the selectmen went ahead and endorsed, and we felt that it was important to include something like that in the charter. So there's language in the charter about how we approach formations of future precincts in the town of Plymouth. In the end, it's the selectmen's responsibility and the clerk's responsibility, but there will be a working group that will be created to engage the community to make sure that as we grow as a community, that precincts are devised in a way where no one is left out of the electoral process.
Yeah, right, it was a very interesting process. There's now language in the charter, so the next time we do this, 9 years or whatever from now, it's all spelled out how to do it. This last time around, there was nothing in our current charter that addressed it. And it had to be kind of assembled at the time and figured out how to do it. David?
I'd like to come back to the processes once this is approved in terms of the Select Board. In the transition chapters, so chapter 994, it's pretty clear what happens. I think ultimately you're right that the Select Board manages it, but we clearly say a 7-member Select Board is provided, shall be selected at the first regular town election following the effective date of the charter. At such election, the terms of office of all members of the incumbent board shall expire, notwithstanding the term for which they are elected. And then it outlines the process for the at-large, similar to what happens with town meeting members with the largest number of votes and so on. So to me, it's, our new charter is fairly clear on the process. So I didn't quite understand people challenging it, because
I'm not sure they looked at the
if
transition
everybody's
section.
terms expire, it's a brand-new election.
Yeah, one of the, I don't think they were looking at the transition section where that language is.
Yeah, it seems
One
to
of
me
the,
crystal clear.
Right. David?
And believe it or not, there is precedent for that, and it goes all the way back to the early 50s. Of course, I was only 4 years old, so I don't remember. But in the early 50s, we went from 3 selectmen to 5, and at that time, all terms ended, and everybody had to run at the same time. Now, as it happened, 3 of the selectmen got reelected, and there were 2 additional selectmen elected also. But there is precedent for that.
I'd like to add that the initial impetus for the Charter Commission were individuals that formed out of dissatisfaction and looking for an entirely different form of government, in which case, if it had happened, all of the selectmen, select board, all of the elected officials would have had to had their terms ended. A mayoral system or a council system would have required that. And so I'm not sure, again, where this argument or the motivation for this criticism comes from. But as David said and the chairman, there is plenty of detail in the charter to address this.
Yeah, our council came up with, I say, 2 different alternatives. One preserves the existing terms of the select board members. That's one way of doing it. And then the other one is the way we propose doing it in the transition section, which would cut short the terms of people holding office. And council justified that by his legal argument saying that it's within the power of the legislature and therefore within the power of the town of Plymouth through the enactment of a charter to dissolve existing boards, such as the Board of Selectmen, start over with new terms and so forth. I mean, that's what happens every time. So he actually spelled out two different alternatives, one of which is already codified in our transition section. Anything further on this one? Okay. So I'm just coming to the planning and sprawl and costly development. And we addressed that one by requiring that all zoning and development must follow a master plan. And we put a lot of emphasis on the master plan language in our current charter and then added to it. The current charter requires a master plan to be updated every 10 years, same as the new charter does, but we spelled out some further language that says every time there is a bylaw or ordinance or a warrant article or a permit for a project, the planning department has to make a finding as part of the process that whichever one of those items is on the table aligns with the master plan. So it has to make an affirmative certification that he's familiar with the master plan and familiar with the article or the bylaw or whatever, and they're in sync with each other. I mean, it's one thing just to have a master plan sitting on a shelf unused, but to have the town actually following it is the key. And that's why we have several pages in the charter addressed to do exactly that, to be sure that the town is following it. And once the report is made by the planning department, that's then circulated to the planning board, the town meeting, and the other decision-making bodies before they vote on whether or not to grant a change in the bylaw or a warrant article or to issue a permit, one of the permit granting boards. They will know whether or not it aligns with the master plan and presumably vote accordingly. So that is hopefully will be one way to address growing sprawl.
That as a member of the planning board, especially in my initial year, I brought up the master plan many times, and I don't really feel there was support for that, for saying, does this meet the master plan? Does this meet those initial ideas that we've been talking about but not necessarily applying for the last 18 to 20 years or so? I think this will give a board like the planning board, will make them more effective. And
That's the hope.
I really look forward to seeing that.
Right.
Chairman,
Bill?
Um,
Yep, go ahead.
I think that the other important thing to note is that what we were trying to do around the planning process in the charter was just draw attention to the process that was already in the charter. In the charter, it talks about this planning process where the planning board and the planning department will have a master plan and they will maintain it. But it was language that didn't define the moments in which things should be updated. Plymouth, again, being the fastest growing town, should be looking at this planning process and having updated its master plan every 10 years. Good to note right now that the planning board, again, in their foresight, in their energy, in their efforts, are going through the process of positioning themselves before town meeting in the fall, looking for funding to begin the planning process. Because we haven't done a master plan in Plymouth for almost 18, 19 years. This will be the first effort to do that. So this, hopefully in this charter, will not put us in a situation where it's 19 or 20 years before we do any planning. Being the fastest growing town, we need to be attentive to that. In this charter, what it does is take what language we have and improves it in terms of giving it a definition of when it would happen. So I think those are another example of the discussions that we had over a period of time addressing that shortcoming in the charter and improving it in this version that's before the voters on May 20th.
Right, I would say that of all the functions of the charter that are important to the town, one of the, or at the very top, that we feel in this charter is planning. And what we have done to move planning forward and emphasize that's to be followed. The master plan is critical, and every town board should be following it. It's there now in the charter, underlined, and we expect it should be followed because it becomes part of the decisions when granting special permits or variances or whatever, as well as approving zoning bylaw changes. All of them will be centered on the master plan, which will control the way this town grows. So that, I think planning, if there's any single feature of this charter that's important, it's going to be planning, right at the top. Another change, two changes we've made. One is with respect to the follow-up of articles. We introduced a new committee called the Legislative Oversight Committee, which will follow warrant articles after they pass town meeting and require a report on a regular basis as to what happened to them. Did they get lost? Did they fall through the cracks, or are they being implemented? Because again, we're talking about seriously saving money and tax savings by getting these things done when they're supposed to be done and not prolonging the agony of these projects not getting completed that town meeting votes for. So that's the process. Again, it's called legislative oversight. There's been nothing like it. I know the town has been exploring it at the COPC level in the past, but this will actually put it into the charter as a process to be followed. Another committee, yes.
Just to elaborate on the origins of it, it's important to note that over this period of time that you had this, as we as a charter commission were meeting over the last 2 years, we were taking up the causes of different boards and committees that have been discussing these matters for nearly 5 years. The Committee of Precinct Chairs formed a Legislative Oversight Committee, subcommittee, almost 6 or 7 years ago, and started examining this problem. The problem was all the work that the legislative body did to examine different articles and vote on them and approve them. They wanted to know the status of that work over a period of time. They did have, the most recently, they had a subcommittee that came up with a legislative oversight process that would give greater transparency to the results of town meeting. So when town meeting voted on an article, you'd be able as residents to go back and look and see the status of that article after its passage at town meeting. Where was it in the process of execution or bringing to fruition? We count on a great deal of effort on the part of our paid professional staff at Town Hall to make sure that these events at town meeting that are voted on are properly followed. And that was the deliberation of the Committee of Precinct Chairs for a number of years, trying to figure out how that could be more efficient. And this commission took it up 2 years ago about what we could put in the charter for the first time and give people that level of transparency. You could quickly go back and reference articles that the town meeting had voted on and find out the status of that article. So this is something that we've never seen before. And yes, we do have something here in the town of Plymouth called Burke's Law that tells us the status of account balances, but not the process of where this article is going through the process of town hall and actually becoming a functional active town meeting. So this is really just building on Burke's Law. I'm not sure how old Burke's Law is. There was a town meeting member, Mr. Burke. Early 2000s, Mr. Burke advocated for this process. It was adopted by the town. And this is just building on Mr. Burke's effort to have greater transparency when it comes to the results and the actions of town meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. The other committee I wanted to mention tonight is the new Appointments Advisory Committee. And this is a committee that will be set up to create standards for appointments to various boards and committees. Some are specifically mentioned in the charter as being subject to this process. And then it has a statement in the charter that other boards and committees can accept the same idea and use the Appointment Advisory Committee to help them find appointments. But the idea would be that appointments to boards and committees would have politics totally removed. There would be standards that would be created, resumes collected, a real process for vetting and finding the best candidates for appointments to these important committees. I think we've seen the need now in the past several years for that kind of a process. And we're very anxious to see it start. The Appointment Advisory Committee itself will be appointed by the town manager to keep it, again, free of politics. The town manager is nonpartisan, outside of politics. He would appoint the Appointment Advisory Committee, all its members, and then they would vet the candidates for various town boards that are appointed. It's like the Board of Appeals and so forth. So that's an important new committee. Having said that, next item I want to...
Just to add to the Appointment Advisory Committee, I think it's important to note that it was discussed at great length, the challenges that Plymouth has as we have a number of committees and boards in the town of Plymouth. We have a lot of different people serving on different boards, and at different times, it's not sure who is on those boards or what the full complement of the board is. And we needed to focus our attention on what boards, how they were functioning, who was serving on them, where there was a vacancy. This Appointment Advisory Committee is going to be tracking that information, the status of committees across the town. There has been no overall effort to look at the committees in Plymouth, look at their makeup and whether they're functioning at the level they should be functioning at. Do they have a full complement? What assistance do they need? This draws attention to the committee process in Plymouth. There's many boards and committees, there's many people serving on boards and committees, and the thought was to have an advisory committee that was looking at these committees, seeing where they needed to advertise and attract people to the process. There'd be greater outreach to the community, letting people know about different committees and boards in town that they could serve on, attracting people to submit their letter of interest or a resume, and then having a committee look at those and make recommendations to the appointing body. The appointing bodies we did not touch. The same appointing bodies will continue to appoint people to these boards and committees, but this committee was to, advisory committee was to facilitate better outreach to the community, to recruit people to serve on committees, and in the end, make the committee process in Plymouth more transparent and highly functional.
Thank you. One key aspect of the new charter is to further set up a set of effective checks and balances between the select board and the town meeting, the legislative branch and the executive branch, but have a fairer distribution of responsibilities, a better functioning of our government. And one way we've done that is add specific responsibilities to the Committee of Precinct Chairs. When that committee was first formed in the mid-2000s, I recall I was the first chair of that committee for 3 years, I think it was. That the committee itself was not carefully defined in the charter as to what it was supposed to do. So it's always been a committee kind of looking for its purpose, and we decided in the new charter we would be much more specific, and we have a list of its duties and responsibilities now, the Committee of Precinct Chairs. It's formed by the leaders, the caucus leaders of each precinct. So if you have 18 precincts, there would be 18 members of the Committee of Precinct Chairs being the precinct chairs of each of those precincts. So this body of precinct chairs now, under the new charter, would have such purposes, and now they're all spelled out. And those of you, we all got the red line at home, you'll see it's all in red, because these are new duties and new responsibilities in Chapter 2. But it says it's It's to establish the legislative branch continuity between town meeting and providing for a voice for the legislative branch with respect to the executive branch, which is the select board. The town meeting members will be kept informed about warrant articles. The committee of precinct chairs will make recommendations concerning warrant articles that don't involve finances. Remember, those are going to be limited to the finance committee. The oversight of articles passed by town meeting will be done by the legislative oversight committee, but under the supervision of the committee of precinct chairs, because it's a town meeting. It's following up town meeting. And it will participate in other activities to support town meeting. The committee will make recommendations on whether or not to have a special town meeting and whether to have that third town meeting in January or not. Select board will make the decision, but the committee of precinct chairs will weigh in on it. So it's a much more collaborative government to the committee of precinct chairs will establish the link between town meeting and the select board. The other, if you remember back to the way the finance committee gets appointed, the committee of precinct chairs has 10 of those appointments. And the moderator has the other 5. So the committee of precinct chairs is involved in the appointing of the finance committee. All the way through the charter, you will see many references to the school board, talking to the select board, the planning board, the committee of precinct chairs. We want the boards to be more interactive with each other, and we've spelled out in various instances where that should take place so that they can be operating on the same page. That's committee of precinct chairs, again, would be perhaps a bridge between the legislative and the executive, but these other boards also would certainly be heard. The school committee, the school board is...
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah, just to touch on one of the aspects of, and I think it's important, people, to note, I think you touched on it, that at a certain point in time, we did not have a committee of precinct chairs 20 years ago. It was the foresight of a charter committee to create it. It has been operational now for nearly 20 years, but you need to go back and think of ways of making it more efficient. We were giving it more definition. One of the things I think it's important to understand when you look at that, when it comes to this possible third town meeting, and having the committee of precinct chairs weigh in on that. That's currently the circumstance right now where town meeting members during the pandemic were voting on whether or not to have a town meeting a certain way. So it's not unheard of for the town meeting or town meeting members to weigh in on an aspect of how we meet and when we meet. So I think that was just an attempt to build on the success that we had during that period of time where that was working to the liking of town meeting members, that we would introduce it in the charter, that if we were going to have a possible third charter, that there would be a decision on whether it was necessary or not, and they would be included in that.
Okay. I'm thinking now maybe we could take a break and see if there's public comment or any questions, either from Zoom or comments from our commissioners on Zoom. Betsy.
Trying to get this to unmute. There we go. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Bill, for your introduction and everyone for your comments. I wanted to go double back, and I had raised my hand earlier, but I didn't speak about the third town meeting because there are some people who might get the impression that the third town meeting is something new, and it's just a little more formalized. We did have 3 town meetings a couple of years ago. The select board called a third town meeting in order to ask town meeting to buy some property that they felt was important. So the third town meeting is not a new concept, and in fact, we could have 4 or 5 town meetings if something urgent came up, but it's not something new. It's just a little more directly represented in this particular charter, but it's not a new concept. There have been other times in the past when we've had that third town meeting. Since I became a town meeting member about 25 years ago, I don't remember 4 town meetings, but certainly that's an option if it were urgent. So I think that sometimes people might get the feeling that there's a lot of very new and different parts to this charter, and there are some new and different parts, but it's not a complete rewriting of the charter. There are a lot of things, for example, the master plan and the COPC that are in our present charter. They won't change if this charter is not voted for, but some things are simply more strongly emphasized or given a little bit of a different twist. But it's the charter that we have now with some very important changes, but the whole charter certainly hasn't been changed, and things that we've emphasized are already in the present charter. So thank you.
Right, just to complete Betsy's point about the town meetings, we have 2 town meetings regularly scheduled. The charter adds this possible 3rd town meeting, optional, but there's also an opportunity to have an additional town meeting if necessary. There's a provision in the charter that in 30 days' notice, a town meeting can be called out of the blue for a specific purpose, and I've certainly been to some of those. When a big project all of a sudden is facing the town wants to deal with it right away. I think we had a special town meeting to consider the movie studio. I think we had one dealt with the Pine Hills. I mean, these are major things that can't wait. And the selectmen with a 30-day notice called town meeting town meeting representatives to meet, and we did. And so there's also that opportunity to have a town meeting if necessary on relatively short notice. So at this point, I recognize Mr. Neville.
No, here we go. I'm Peter Neville. I'm a town meeting rep from Precinct 10, and I haven't been here in a while, but I want to reiterate my respect and my appreciation for the work that you've done and for adhering to a process which I believe has been extremely difficult. And at this point, I'm sure you're barraged, as I am, hourly with negativity about the work that you've done. And I came here tonight really to applaud your efforts, and I hope that you're not going to a gunfight with just a knife. And to that end, I have to ask whether or not you're going to seek additional funding to publicize the merits of your work. Because clearly there is a surfeit of funding to promote the negative aspects that some people hold this charter in. So if there's any way you can do that, I would strongly support that. I think that one of the areas that I have trouble getting a grip on is around the reporting of town meeting actions at the warrant, at a town meeting. And, I'm always sitting there overwhelmed. The fire hose is in my mouth, and I've got to vote on this warrant article that I've had a week to look at. And I can never remember what happened 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and I just don't have that sort of memory. So I think that the tracking that you've proposed in this committee that's going to report out on prior warrant articles, I guess I'm wondering how that's going to really work and what the reporting mechanism will be. And will the town manager find himself responding to COPC on Tuesday, but then he's going to respond to the selectmen on Wednesday, and he's going to be barraged with requests to give him information on where the warrant article from 2019 that CPC had a 9C to get a piece of land purchased, blah, blah, blah. I mean, how the hell is this going to work in the day-to-day operation of communicating, where we stand? And, I guess at another level, how urgent is that? Who wants to know?
I think Bill will
Yeah,
address that.
so it's interesting that you're touching on this subject matter, because we spoke about it at length as a commission when we were talking about legislative oversight, how this would be achieved efficiently. It's something that the Committee of Precinct Chairs, when I served on the Committee of Precinct Chairs and there was a Legislative Oversight Committee, we looked at this opportunity. And basically, we're talking about something that's very user-friendly, a simple spreadsheet that shows each town meeting in each article, and every 6 months, the sponsor of that article would be required to go in and populate that box with some sort of update to the status of it. Since town meeting voted on it, did it go to the building committee? Did it go to bid? Where is it in the bidding process? Has that article been executed to whatever extent it was? This was something that was to be designed not to burden the town with having to deal with a size of logistics that would be costly. We were just thinking of a way similar to Burke's Law. There's something out there that exists right now. We were just thinking about a spreadsheet that expanded Burke's Law to identify in some language to give the resident or any town official or anyone on a board or committee or an elected official the ability to go to a resource and see where that article may be. And that information was to be populated by the sponsor of the article 4 times a year, a little update from them. This is something that the Committee of Precinct Chairs is already doing. They call in different sponsors of different articles, randomly looking at different articles. We thought it was better than, rather than just look at one article, let's start tracking them all. And that was the extent of our discussion on our level as a committee of, as a charter commission. But it was also a similar conversation that the committees of precinct chairs had about how would you track this efficiently without burdening the town in any stressful way.
So it suggests that there might be a dynamic spreadsheet on the website that would identify the sponsor of this warrant article and perhaps give contact information should there be questions rising from the person looking at, well, what is the status of the West Plymouth Fire Station that has 10 pickup trucks parked on the Carver Road every morning and, 4 stories of sand and gravel in the parking lot. And, as I drive by on my way to Squirrel Run, I think, well, where is this project? I know I voted on it a couple of years ago, and it looks like something's happening. Is it going to be the new central fire station? I mean, it could be the Taj Mahal for the amount of stuff. So this would be a wonderful resource. I guess it goes back to, well, who's going to, one, keep that up, or I guess guarantee or have the gravitas to have someone fill it out? Because the petitioner of that warrant article may be long gone. It may have actually been window dressing for someone else.
Right.
Who had a, how would you say, a bone in the...
You can't anticipate every scenario, hypothetically, you can't anticipate every scenario, but what we were trying to do, if there was a moment where the sponsor of that article wasn't available, obviously there would be a moment of information that wasn't there, would require someone to take a greater look at why they're not reporting on that article. Is that sponsor or that committee or that person still available to provide that information? At no time, though, should an article passed by town meeting the town not know the status of that article. And it shouldn't be kind of an Easter egg hunt to find out what the status is of an article. Residents, committee members, boards, elected officials, and town officials often have to kind of track down where is the status of that article. And this is just a thought of beginning that process where it's kind of the canary in the coal mine where, wait a second, we're not getting any information back on that article. That's going to require us to take a greater look at why we're not hearing back on this article. But it is something that was going to, we were thinking of just trying to be transparent and accountable and put something down and have the petitioner of the article, or the sponsor of the article, update the status of their work over a period of time.
So I'd like to comment as well that, I don't know, Mr. Neville, if you saw a recent meeting where the town manager, actually it was a COPC meeting, not sure you were there, the last one, and the town manager was making suggestions to the COPC chairperson that they were willing to do what it takes to make that happen on their end, between the COPC and the town, willing to provide the staff people, if necessary, to testify or to state or to pass on information, and that necessarily had not been happening before. That was one of the roadblocks, that the COPC, without maybe some of the delineated authority that is in the new charter, wasn't getting that respect, and maybe that's not the right word, but they weren't getting the information they wanted. So now we've got this in the revised charter, there's a lot of talk about it, and we're seeing that, I think, start to happen. But I also want to say that I see this as much as a transparency issue as anything. As a reporter in the days past, if I wanted, sometimes I would see that an article was not being applied or in a way that I thought had originally been the idea. And I would like to go and say, okay, what happened at town meeting? And there was minimal notes. As a matter of fact, right now, I believe the town clerk and the previous town clerk had felt that all they were required to do in terms of recording what happened at town meeting was record the motions and the votes and what happened. So it was very difficult to find out what the motion exactly was or who said what. And now in this charter, I believe in this revised charter, a related issue to this one is that the people recording this are going to have electronic placing, so you could find your way through a 4-hour town meeting to that spot and look exactly at what was said, because otherwise there was no report of that. No. So I think that's also tied into what we were after. Overall transparency, better communications, openness not only between the town meeting and staff here in Town Hall, but between people that are interested in the grassroots, the people on the street that say to themselves, I don't think this is how it should have happened or what was done. They can look it up now, or at least if the charter is approved. Thank you.
Peter, just to allay some of your fears, on your way to Squirrel Run on Friday, you will see David Peck, who's the chairman of the building committee. You'll see his white SUV. I'm the vice chairman. You'll see my gray pickup. And Tom Fagazzi, former fire chief, you'll see his white pickup. The renovations are
I'll bring the donuts.
All right. The renovations are going on schedule. It's very difficult to rehab an existing station. It's actually easier to build a new one. But location-wise, you can't beat where it is, so that's why it's being rehabbed.
Yep.
And bear in mind, it's not a Taj Mahal. When you renovate a station, now you have to build it up to the current specifications. And a major specification now is you've got to have a separate bunk room for each firefighter because of the co-ed firefighters. So it's a whole different ballgame. It's progressing nicely. We have a good general contractor, and the general is the same one who's going to renovate Manomet. Again, same conditions exist. You've got to build it up to the new standards. So your building committee is well represented there. And this summer and this spring, David was also overseeing the school roof project. So we do take an active role.
Thank you. My fears have been allayed. And thank you again. I hope that each commissioner will take whatever opportunity there is available to them, particularly in the social media, to restate their commitment to this charter and recognize a team effort that produced, I think, a great document that will just grow. Thank you very much for your service. And thank you, Tiffany, for all your work. Michelle?
Thank you, Peter. I just want to make one response to one of the items you mentioned about getting the word out. Under the, of course, we can only spend money in the charter budget with respect to producing the actual charter and explaining its provisions. Any so-called campaign has to be funded separately, and we would not, of course, use any of our budget for that purpose, and we've been very clear about that, and there's absolutely no disagreement among this commission. If money is to be spent to promote the charter in a public fashion on the ballot, that has to be privately raised and reported as regular campaign financing. And it's not in our budget. Other comments?
I think we're still in public comment, right?
Yeah, well, I'm just gonna.
If there's any more
further
public comment.
Public comment? Michelle, do we have anybody up on Zoom? Okay. Are there any questions that anybody might have about the charter? Yes, sir. Right. This is a little green light there.
Committee, I believe it's on. My name is John Joseph. I live in Precinct 14. Just spontaneously, I'm encouraged by the refinements and improvements you're making in the charter. What I haven't heard yet, and hopefully you'll address, we talked, and very rightly so, this oversight committee is tracking the status. What I haven't heard are the consequences of non-performance. If you're tracking projects and you're tracking town performance and you're tracking financials and certain projects, certain activities are not performing, how does the charter handle the consequences of non-performance?
Okay, who wants to? fill
I
that?
can touch
Bill?
on that. One of the things that I've learned over a period of time serving town meeting, as a town meeting member and as a presenter of articles, that if you do not have a good track record of performance in terms of the work that you're required to do to get to town meeting with an article, to present an article at town meeting, and eventually pass the article at town meeting. And then you have to bring the article to fruition. You have that track record. And now you have to go back to town meeting year after year, and if you're not able to achieve these goals, the town meeting will, question your next presentation, whether or not that this is a viable option. So if there seems to be articles that are not getting the work done, and who's presenting them, this would have an effect on town meeting members and how they would get behind an article in the future. There isn't any article police where someone is going to be detained because they didn't get the article done, but it's going to bring town meeting members and residents to look at why this isn't getting done. It becomes a larger discussion so that in future articles, when they come before the legislative body, the body can say, hang on a second, where is this other article? So the knowledge would be available. So what I have found in the past is that if you're not able to present the article, or if you're not able to pass the article or bring the article to completion, town meeting members will be looking at that when you come back before them in the future, looking to, ask them another question. So it's a matter of just, really, it's about compiling information, getting it to the people that have to make the decision, and letting them make a decision what they're going to do with that information.
David? David Peck?
Yeah, just, Mr. Chairman, if you want to say a word or two, or I will, about estimated costs for this charter. I think there have been wildly variable estimates of the potential cost. At our last meeting, I said the only obligated one in the charter is 2 more selectmen. I mean, in terms of any hiring or anything. And I'd point out that any costs don't happen unless they're approved by town meeting. You know, and I would point out, if anybody was sort of following, and you look at the motions from our last town meeting, the town's budget's been going up $10 million or $12 million a year, which town meeting looks at every article and looks at every sub-article. When, I'm an optimist, when I say when this charter passes, not if, you know, clearly, town departments in the town will have to come in and present to town meeting what the budget will be. And if we really want it, within that $10 million or $12 million a year, they can find the pieces of it to support, you know, the activities that are outlined in the charter. I think the aggressively negative, you know, the no people who are throwing a lot of resources at this are, you know, speculating on what the cost might be, and that's what it is. It's pure speculation as part of their campaign, but as I say, the only mandated costs are 2 additional select board, and somehow, and all the other costs would have to go to town meeting for approval, and, you know, there's a larger effort. Hopefully, this charter would provide the greater representation and scrutiny of because I know all the citizens are worried about their tax rate and the overall budget. But this charter does not change the pressures we have, and as I say, I'm just challenging that wild speculation. I'd also point out my own take on the third town meeting. It's, you know, some describe it as optional. I describe it as required unless COPC and Select Board said it's not really needed. Being on the building committee, as Dave Malaguti reminded, time is money. We're at an escalation point. If you just looked at the headlines today, when the Federal Reserve raised the interest rate more because they're afraid of inflation, certainly in construction and probably across our lives, there is inflation that can be running 5 to 6% a year. That's kind of 0.5% a month. And so therefore, by having a third town meeting or fourth, if necessary, you are potentially saving, you know, a 0.5% or 1% for every couple months that you delay a decision. So there are potential savings or cost avoidance by meeting more frequently, which of course is one of my goals all along across the charter thing. Again, so if you look at the budget, $285 million is what we just approved. You know, take 1% or 0.5% of that, you know, you're talking real money. So I think frequent meetings, the third town meeting is a potential way to save some money and avoid costs. So that's why, in the bigger picture, if I may, just in terms of my support for this improved town meeting, as many of you know, I came in and remain in favor of a council form of government, which meets every 2 weeks and represents, you know, all of their precincts and districts. However, I respect our commission. We voted democratically to not go to the council form this time around to improve town meeting. So I'm in support, in part because some of the improvements are hints of a future council. I think moving to 7 select board members increases our representation. The increased responsibilities for COPC are a hint of what a council might do, meeting far more frequently and deliberating more frequently. What I hear from friends who are opposed to this current charter, I've heard things like, it gives too much power to town meeting. That troubles me because the town meeting is, in fact, you know, our legislative, the town meeting should have the legislative authority. And I hear people saying it's too much power for the COPC and it's an untried experiment. I'm not so sure, because I say if it's in a way a or a hint of what a council could be, let's give it a try. because it is providing representation from all precincts in an equal way. So that, the more mandated meetings between the committees, which has been built in here, I think the master plan inclusion across multiple decision points is important. But, you know, that's why I'm in support, and just wanted to double back to costs and frequent meetings, is that's where you can scrutinize things and spread the work through the year and potentially save 1 or 2 or 3% by more frequent decision-making. So,
David Malguini.
Well, thinking back, I should have probably mentioned this earlier, but there was one year when we had the annual and we had either 3 or 4 specials. I can't remember the year, and I'm sorry to say I didn't take the time to look it up in my town reports, but there were 3 or 4 specials in this one year. So it's important to note that we can act very rapidly if we have to. Having spent 22 years on the Board of Selectmen, I think it would be extremely naive of us to think that there won't be some increased costs. I really question the 1.4 million that has been floated around, and I don't mean to second-guess either Lynn Barrett or Derek Brindisi. I haven't sat down with either one of them to scrutinize this, but I do question that 1.4 million. But again, it's extremely naive to think that there won't be extra expenses, because all of this work that we've put on the COPC, they're going to need a clerical person. And all of the work that we've put for some of the oversight, that's going to be another person, because you can't just simply take a town employee and say, now you will do this, because there are union issues. So bear in mind that there will be expenses, but again, I question the 1.4 million.
Okay, thank you. Question, yes.
Blind squirrel looking for the acorn. No, I'm not here to debate the pros and cons of this. I really did want to get more information. But when you talk about an oversight committee, and you use the word oversight, it implies a level of power there. So if you're just looking for a spreadsheet, just call it the spreadsheet committee. But oversight is, in effect, an implied policing or enforcement activity. So be careful about the words you're using, because if I went to the chair of an oversight committee and I saw that certain projects were handling favorably and unfavorably, my first question to the chairman would be, what are you doing about the projects that are not performing properly? Just the way we run our household. So I'm not here to suggest you should or should not include a third leg of government, but I am here to say that if you're going to use the word oversight, recognize the power of that word and the expectation it creates among some of us who understand the power of the word.
Thank you. Any other comments from the audience? Michelle, why don't we spend a few minutes now on the budget? We have our final budget here for the commission for 2 years. The news from the commission is good. We were under budget in our 3 items. We had money left over in legal services, printing, and other miscellaneous expenses. If you look at the line that shows the balances, we have about $1,300 left in the legal services budget. I think we'll probably have one more invoice from our special counsel. So that money we need to keep there for the time being. The printing, we still have $5,000 available that may be contributed over to the select board to help defray some of their charter-related expenses. And then under miscellaneous expenses, we're still showing a $10,000 still available. And that may again be the cost of sending out the charters, which the select board incurred to all residents. I've said publicly, and I've said it again, that to the extent that we have money left over, we're happy to contribute. Does anyone have any questions on the charter, on the budget?
I have a comment on the budget.
Yes.
I would suggest we don't transfer any money until we have all our final bills, and if it's May 20th, that would be
Yep.
fine.
Right. David?
What's not shown here is Michelle's, compensation for supporting us for 2 years. So is that in a prior year, or should that be in terms of where we are living within the budget? Because Michelle's done a terrific job, but I don't see in this spreadsheet recognition of that compensation.
Well, we didn't report salaries because salaries and expenses are treated separately. So we just put the expense accounts down.
Well, I guess, are we
Right
on,
now-
are we on budget for,
There is $1,600 still remaining in salaries
okay,
out
that's,
of a $10,000 budget.
yeah, that's all I wanted to know, because it wasn't here. Okay. Thank you, and thank you.
You're welcome, thank you.
Okay, does any commissioner have any other commission provision-related questions or comments? David?
Because questions that I've gotten in the last week or so.
Good.
I think mailing it out as early as we did was a mistake, because at least 3 people said, gee, where can I get a copy? And I said, it was mailed to you. And I said, I don't remember that, but probably by getting it in March, a lot of people discarded it or looked at it and then discarded it, and now they're paying attention. And I said, go to town hall, it's not a problem, you can get them. But I think it just was it should have been mailed closer to the vote date.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting thing. As the clerk, I did receive a phone call from a resident of the town of Plymouth who found that I was the clerk of this committee and wanted to bring to my attention that when he went to the post office, that there was a stack of proposed charters on the floor in the corner of the room. They weren't putting them in the P.O. boxes. They were just telling people to take them as they left. So it's it's an interesting practice at the post office, and they might leave some sort of advertisement flyer out that's supposed to be delivered to everybody's household, but if you're a P.O. box and you're at a little box, they just leave it on the table, so you go to your box, you pull your stuff out, you're supposed to stop and pick up these things that didn't get into your box, and the resident was drawing that to my attention, which I was drawing it to others' attention on how the post office should be making sure that everybody's getting a copy of this document. But sadly, that's how it goes in some places around Plymouth. That's how the charter was distributed.
It's too bad. I heard from several people who, wanted to get it, and I told them where to get it, but I think they threw it away by accident, or.
I heard as well, as Bill said, from a resident of southern Plymouth who has a post office box at Long Pond Road, the chief post office, and they said the same thing, that there was a big stack that had not been delivered to their boxes, which is I don't know where the failure lies there, definitely the post office, but I would have hoped that there would have been more follow-through on that. But I would also say that I think we made a mistake with the red line version. I believe we should have sent them the straightforward, you can read it through. The red line is very difficult to read through. People don't understand even the smallest item, if it's a capitalization change, is a red line, and I think people found that difficult.
The decision of the Board of Selectmen to do, that was their,
they asked us to do
they wanted to do that just so that the resident would have greater ease of seeing what the charter looks like now and what changes are. So I can see where the Board of Selectmen were trying to provide additional information in the printing of this material, so the average resident could look and see what the charter is currently stating and what we are proposing. I would have preferred, rather than red, which is a negative connotation, I would have gone with blue ink. But that's just me, I'm a visual guy.
I think most people don't, though, have that depth of interest in understanding the changes. They want to be able to read through it and understand it. And I think the language of the charter without the red line is very good, is very readable. And I would have liked people to have had that opportunity just to read through casually. I think they would have been able to focus on the most important elements.
It's a very good point.
Mr. Chairman.
David, your comment about sending it out too early. The statute, I guess, was based on a lot of experience by the learned drafters of the statute, because there's language in the provision that says not less than 2 weeks before the election. And I remember thinking at the time, 2 weeks? Are they going to wait for 2 weeks before? Maybe that would have been a sounder decision.
Well, I think,
a month.
yeah, but I think as long as you're providing the residents with the information as soon as possible so they can deliberate and debate it and discuss it and understand it, I think it's a good thing. So when it comes to information and the residents and the work that committees and boards do in the town, I think it's always good to provide them with as much information as soon as possible.
Okay.
And Bill, to your point, that was going to be my question. I believed that there was a statutory requirement, but I couldn't remember what it was. So you've cleared that up.
Right. No, but I think by picking March, they tried to kind of cut in the middle. Some wanted it out in January. Okay. Moving along, is there any new business? David?
Yes, and this is win or lose. I would propose this group have a social gathering afterwards to celebrate the 2 years of work. As I say, win or lose. I always like to say, let's plan the party too, because a lot of work went into it. We spent a lot of time here. Our partners and mates might have said, what the hell are you doing? We would like to see you more often. So after May 20th, I hope there's a chance for us to get together.
Right.
Is that a motion?
I'd look for a second.
Second.
Okay. Assume everybody's in favor. Betsy?
Bill,
Betsy? Are you voting or want to speak?
I'm in favor, and I would like to say something.
All right. But is there any other new business?
I think did Betsy want to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to make a comment on what David just said. I think it's a great idea to get together and have some relaxed time. But I also wanted to say I have felt for a long time that whether or not the residents of Plymouth vote for this charter or not, the town wins. We have put an enormous amount of work into researching other towns and their town meetings. We have come up with a lot of unique ideas, and we have been able to support those ideas with good reasons. So I think that if this is not the right time for the town to pass this charter, I think that future charter committees and commissions will have a lot of good ideas and a lot of research as well that's already been accomplished. So I think the town wins and we win as commissioners, no matter what the election vote shows.
Thank you, Betsy. So was there any old business? No. Any more new business? Anybody have anything further to say? Who knows, we may have more legal questions to answer between now and the 20th.
Bill, Pat Allen.
Yes, Pat Edelman.
I'm Pat Adelman. I just want to echo what Peter said and Betsy, and I really appreciate the 2 years of very thoughtful work that you have done. I think the changes aren't changes just for change. I think they're progressive changes, and I think you're just making the town better. Thank you. And thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Pat. So any further comment? If not, then a motion would be in order to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
And a second.
All in favor? We are adjourned.